Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. My name is Josh Treese, and I'm coming to you from Music City, USA, with the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I want to start off this week's episode by saying thank you. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the podcast. Thank you to everyone who's listened. Thank you to everyone who shared it with friends. Thank you. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, I'd love to ask you to leave a 5-star rating and even write a review. It helps the show gain visibility on iTunes and helps us accomplish our goal of making mental health more accessible and available to everyone. This week, I welcome Dr. Noah Zapf into the theater. I met Noah originally as my first landlord for the office of my therapy practice in Nashville. Not too long after that, I found out that we were graduating in the same ceremony at Trevecca, me with a master's and him with a doctorate. This week, Noah brought the movie We Bought a Zoo to talk about, so I'll throw this in there now. If you haven't seen it and care about spoilers, now's your chance to hit pause and watch it and then join us after. So, let's get right into it. Go ahead and dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. On the show today.
Yeah, honored to.
I have been super stoked about having you on, and I like to start every interview. I don't like interview. Interview sounds so formal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Just having a guest, I guess. I don't know. Every chat with just asking somebody some stuff about themselves, like. How did you get started in all this? Like, what was it about therapy that attracted you to do it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because this is an interesting field, to kind of get involved in. So I actually would say that, like, part of my interest, began for me when I was, like, much younger. I have an uncle who's a therapist, and so as a kid, I remember going and visiting his office. He worked at, like, a youth center, like, so there was, his office, but there was this gym attached, had a rock climbing wall, and I remember thinking, like, this is the best office I've ever seen. And so,
yeah,
if you grow up someday and you have to work in an office, like, this is probably the best office to choose. So, I used to tell people, I'm gonna be a therapist, but really the basis at that point was,
I want to be a rock climber.
I wanted to have a cool office where I could go rock climbing, whenever I wanted to. But so then, thinking about that was always kind of in my mind. I've always been a very relational person. Make conversation, just kind of being aware of other people's kind of emotions and feelings has always been something that's just how I'm wired. So when I got to college, I pretty much, like, had that in my mind that, okay, I want to be a psych major and I want to go into this field. And so I was a psych major, but at the end of my freshman year, I ended up getting invited to come work at a church with a guy who was a senior that year. And so I actually ended up going into youth ministry then after that because I had such a great summer.
Are you serious? I didn't even know that about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I spent 10 years doing that too.
Really? Okay. Yeah, so I did that. Let's see. So I mean, I went back to Texas each summer, at the same church. And then after graduation, I ended up taking a job as a youth pastor, and I did that for 5 years.
Wow.
I still kept my psych major. I just picked up a youth ministry minor.
Mm-hmm. Where was your undergrad at?
Taylor University.
Where's that?
It's in Indiana. It's about middle of nowhere, but in between Indianapolis and Fort Wayne.
I went to Columbia International University in South Carolina.
Okay.
Which, even though it's in the capital, and I was from Columbia my whole life, I had never heard of it until my senior year of high school.
Yeah.
And it's because an intern at my church was going there, and he was like, "Oh, dude, you should think about,
Yeah. Well, Taylor's located in one of these towns that, like, I mean, the town more than doubles when school is in session. Mm-hmm. And the school is small. It's like maybe 2,000 students. So It's a tiny little town.
That's what CIU was.
In the cornfields of Indiana. But it was a great experience. Like, you know, so in some ways, like there was nothing else to do but just be in a relationship with other people. You couldn't leave and go. We didn't even go to movies really because it's like you had to drive like at least 30 minutes. And when you're in college, who has the money for gas and the movie?
Yeah.
So I did that. Probably about 3 or 4 years, into youth ministry though. I knew that like the thing that I enjoyed the most about youth ministry was just being in conversation one-on-one with students or even with parents or and it just kind of got me thinking again, like, so if I could do the thing that I enjoyed the most, like that I only get to do 30-40% of the time, if I could do that 100% of the time, why wouldn't I? And that's when my wife and I had kind of decided, okay, let's do this. Let's go, go back to school, get my master's and pursue a career in counseling.
Wow. Out of curiosity, and I'm going to try not to project as I ask this, I'm wondering if you had a similar kind of feeling in your exit from youth ministry as I did. When I was in it and I took the Myers-Briggs a lot, I always came out extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
But even being in it, I'd go to church on Sunday, and I would always say, I flip a switch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've got to take on a role when I get there, and then when I leave, I flip the switch off, and I would do what I call caving up on Sundays.
Yeah.
To get my solitude. As soon as I was out of youth ministry and I took the Myers-Briggs again, I was as hard introvert as you could be. Also, that was after I had entered into therapy as a client myself.
Yeah.
And gotten kind of in touch with more of my true self. And I wondered, did you experience that at all? Like, did you maybe have to lean or convince yourself you had to lean more extrovert when you were doing it?
Well, it's an interesting question. I would say that I have seen a progression over the course of my life. I definitely really was probably more hard, line extrovert when I was younger. And I don't know, I didn't notice the shift quite as much in my youth ministry years, but as a therapist now, I've noticed that I'm definitely probably leaning more introvert than I would even extrovert. I'm not hardcore introvert by any means either. I think that, but in both of these professions, like it does, like you're giving a lot, of yourself. So on Sunday nights or Wednesday nights when I was a youth minister, you're there in a role that other people are looking to you, for guidance or for, they want to process or talk about something. It's not like you're going there to unburden your stuff to them. And the same thing as in the therapy hour. It's that, it's by design. It's like, hey, you're going to come into this room with me and we're going to talk about what you need to talk about. I'm not going to take what I needed to talk about with you. So I think that, that like maybe just to recharge the battery a little bit, you've got to just kind of get away from people. In both of those, environments. Yeah.
I think, I just heard you say to make the shift out of that to lean into what you enjoy doing more, like the one-on-one kind of. It made me curious about that. 'Cause I remember even back then, and I think I talked about this with Alicia last week, just if somebody asked, hey, if money was no object and you could do anything, what would you do? And I was like, I think I would just sit with people and just talk with them all the time and just see how you're doing. What do you need? Is there anything I can help you with?
Yeah.
And having no idea that was a part of something you could get paid for. Which I remember back in my undergrad, Dr. Olshine, who was my professor and mentor and like another dad to me, he had us read some book where at the beginning, Howard Hendricks, the Dallas theological guy, had a quote that said, if anybody gets into youth ministry for the money, they don't have the brains for the job. And I think I think therapy is something similar.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just think it is so giving
Mm-hmm.
that if you're coming at it from a compensation standpoint, I feel like you're a
Mm-hmm.
little limited,
Mm-hmm.
because it will kind of constrain you in some ways.
Yeah.
That, yeah. So you guys decided collectively, all right, we're going to give this a
Mm-hmm.
shot. Where did you do your grad school work at?
I did it here in Nashville at Trevecca.
Oh, nice.
So I did my master's there. At the time, as my master's was finishing, I was part of the program where it was a 48-hour degree, but you had to have 60 hours to get licensed. So everybody got the degree, and then you would go on and just take an additional 12 hours of coursework.
In anything or
I mean, in
related?
any graduate level counseling degree, program. So at the time, I was thinking, one of the things that I did enjoy about youth work or youth ministry that I really didn't see happening a lot was the teaching element.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, why don't I just, take those additional 12 hours in the PhD program, that if I ever decided I did want to go ahead and just, get a PhD so I could maybe, teach somewhere, I would just, it was like I wouldn't have to double spend to get the license and then start that degree. So that's what I did is I started that and, just ended up enjoying the time in the program. And so I stuck with it. And so I went through, master's right into PhD and,
Wow.
and so both at Trevecca.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any, because I know the PhD is such a specific, like you at some point develop a research proposal and then you undertake this giant, I'm going to do research, I'm going to find out something that needs to be found out in the world. Did you have any inkling during the master's kind of where you wanted to head with that? Did that come later in the PhD?
Yeah, that definitely probably came later. 'Cause I think a lot of that for me developed as I began working with clients, and just seeing kind of, again, you when you undertake a dissertation, you're committing. I mean, for me, it was like probably the better part of 4 years of my life to reading and researching and writing about a particular topic. So I was like thinking, I really want this to not just be a means to an end for a degree. I want this to make me a better therapist. I want this to inform. I want this to help people. That I, because I don't know. I mean, a lot of dissertations, they get written and don't ever get published. And I just wanted to make sure. Well, at the very least, I want to know that this is informing my practice, so that there's a impact on my clients. And so that's kind of. As we're alluding to, my dissertation topic was on essentially what are some predictors to kind of internet pornography use, and so learning how can we kind of like anticipate people are going to have a struggle with this, and why are they going to have a struggle, what kind of attributes or characteristics of that, which then can inform how do we treat this. So
How much a part of that was attachment related?
Huge part of it. I always joked that like if you want to do anything kind of research related right now, you got to at least do something attachment, because like it's I mean it's I think most people, like my experience was that you learn about the attachment theory and it like connects to home so much. And you're just like, wow, this is I mean, you can read about Freud and you can say, okay, Freud, like maybe I can see where you're coming at a little bit, but then you read the attachment theory and you're just like, yeah.
I think for so many of us, when we heard about that fairly early on in the program, it blew our minds, having had no contact with it previous, versus like, my joke with Freud is always Dr. Hopkins literally walked in on the first day of class and said, all right, everybody, Freud's on page 19. You just need to know when and what page, and we're never going to talk about him again.
Yeah.
So when I had our research class at Trevecca, and we had to develop a proposal, my idea, and it's one that I would like to carry on into the PhD program, is to try to find out if somebody is in addiction,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of attachments did they have in life previous to that, to see if we work on helping them develop healthy attachments, what effect it has on their sobriety. Which sounds like you did a lot of that. And when I was looking up articles for that for our research class, I found one.
Yeah.
And it was on a study of Latino mothers and daughters who were alcoholics. The I don't know what the word, health of their relationship. And so they would look at if the mother's an alcoholic and the daughter's not, if the daughter is and the mother's not, if both are, and if neither are, and what effect the addiction had
Yeah.
on that.
So you're saying that like a lot of it would be focused on this family of origin, like the looking at that attachment they have with their primary attachment figures if they were addicts, or
So I guess in relation to your, is that a predictor? So like if they came from a family where they had unsecure attachment, does that add to their chances of developing addiction? And then if we work on helping them to develop secure attachments, how much of an effect does that have on sobriety? I mean, my hypothesis would be it'd have a huge effect, because if addiction is an intimacy disorder, then if we work on intimacy, then there you go.
I would agree. I think that would be an interesting thing, because I haven't seen there's the the attachment theory at the core of it. It basically says that that a lot of our primary attachment style is just based upon what we didn't receive from our primary attachment figure. But we do also have the ability to develop secure attachment, outside of that, just through, I mean, that's part of why we're therapists, is we believe that we can help, people to go back and re-examine and heal from some of those past wounds and new relationships and our marriages or whatever. Like, big part of like EFT is that we believe that like creating this like new dance for two people in this, partnership can like lead to secure attachment. So it would be an interesting thing to see just how much like, especially to what the primary attachment figures, their attachment styles, because a lot of the stuff that you're right is out there in the literature today. I mean, there's several studies now that are looking specifically with like, sexual addiction and attachment on, on that. I referenced my uncle earlier, which was funny is, he's got his PhD, and I didn't even know this until I started, I came up with my topic, and then I knew he had a PhD, but I didn't know what he did his dissertation. And so I'm looking, and all of a sudden I see like, oh, he did, attachment styles and sexual addiction. And so his study was a little bit different than mine, but, there was some very similar. So like, you see him referenced throughout my dissertation a number of times.
Wow.
So the thing that, so I had three different predictors that I had to examine. One, the main one I was most curious about was attachment style. And then I also did like kind of someone's shame, how prone they are to shame, both just general shame and then sexual shame. And then the third one was kind of parental communication about sexuality. So whether or not people came from a very much more permissive kind of attitude towards sex in general versus like homes that were maybe more conservative and very restrictive.
Which I feel like would be directly related to shame.
Yes, yeah. The fascinating thing about that part of the study is that it basically didn't seem to matter what kind of home you grew up in. It wasn't going to have an impact on somebody's pornography use or their likeliness to look at pornography. Essentially, these other things had a bigger impact, and so if you're going to look at it, you're not going to look at it. It doesn't really matter what kind of home you grew up in. The only thing it did matter is that if you did look at it, you felt so much more bad about it if you grew up in a very conservative home. So the big takeaway for me on that is that, in churches and amongst kind of like conservative Christian households is that we've got to be really careful about what are we teaching about, maybe God's design for marriage and sexuality, because right now, for most people, and this is a big generalization, but I think it's true, is that for most people, what they actually take away from those lessons are just this shameful, you're bad. Like, I joke sometimes with my clients that like a lot of people kind of grow up in these environments in churches where they're like, oh, you murdered someone? That's fine. God's grace covers all.
And you hear stories about people forgiving people on death row that murdered their family. Like,
you're encouraged. Like, that's,
you can be forgiven.
You know, I mean, Moses, he did it too. It's like, but then it's like, oh, you looked at porn? Like, you dirty, like, you horrible, or, oh, you had premarital sex? Like, you are.
Yeah.
And so, we've got to be better about, like, helping people understand that, like, okay, hey, maybe there's a design, maybe there's a reason for that design, and at the same time, that the sin is sin, and it's not like.
Yeah, and I think that. What did you just say? It was innocent?
No, like just sin is sin.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I thought you said it was innocent. I feel like that goes against the sex addiction thing that we're both kind of working with over here. I think that specifically in the church environment, one of the big dangers is like what you're saying. In the way that it's taught a lot, it just puts this giant blanket of shame over it. And not just for the members of the congregation, but I also think for the pastors and the staff members as well, to where if you do get involved in watching and viewing pornography, there's such a covering of shame and such a fear of losing your job that it's like a double bind. Like, I can't come forward and ask for help, but I also can't continue on with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, shame grows in the dark, and so inevitably the continuation does happen until the bottom falls out.
Yeah.
And you can't continue anymore. And one thing that I am going to start working on soon, and actually I think you would be a great person to use as a resource, I'd like to develop something that I can offer to pastors on how to address it in their church. Because I think it's just something that at best is teaching Song of Solomon and Ephesians and just two become one and sex is reserved for marriage. And at worst is a fire and brimstone railing against sex from the pulpit.
Yeah.
And I'd like to come at it more along the lines of, hey, this is something that more people than you realize are dealing with, and to turn a blind eye to it is not in service of anybody. And like any other addiction, which I think this is interesting, and I think this is similar to what you said, when it comes to like alcoholics, being a part of recovery or AA, it's almost celebrated. Like you get a badge of honor. Having another kind of addiction, especially sex addiction, there's much more of a stigma attached to it, and more shame piled on top. And so I'd like to develop something that could be a resource, whether it's an hour, seminar or something, and just invite pastors to say, hey, here's ways you can start a conversation. Here's resources you can have, so that you don't have to keep keeping the lights off on this.
Yeah. It's very much needed. At the same time, like, parents are very much need this too, and how to talk to their kids about this. We know that right now the age of first-time exposure to pornography is on average around the age of 11, but that's like, that's even...
It's going down.
It's going down. I know that I've got a lot of clients. Even my son was like, he's in first grade and he was talking about like, some kid at school is talking about, boobs, like, and so he's just kind of like first grade. Yeah. And he's just like, what is that? And it's so, like they're being exposed to this stuff early in life. And, so first and foremost, it's like, my first grader, he wants to know about everything in this world. So he's been really into weather lately. Like today, last night, this morning, it stormed last night, and so we're eating breakfast, and he's just saying to me, what if a supercell covered the entire Earth? And I'm like, how do you even know what a supercell is? But
I would start with, well, first off, son, what's a supercell?
yeah, and he's so into like volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. Like, so it's like when he starts to learn about something, he just wants to know everything about it. And so, there's a general curiosity in all kids. They want to just know about the world that they live in. And so guess what? Our bodies, like the bodies of somebody else that looks different than them, they're very curious about that. And so you take like a 7 or 8-year-old who is not hit puberty. They're not like looking for sexual gratification at this point, but there's a curiosity, about these things that they're being exposed to. And when our response is, what did you say? Like, don't you ever say that again.
Where did you hear that?
Where did you hear that? It's almost like, here comes the shame train. Like, let's just make you feel like you're the worst, like, because you were curious about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we teach them to never talk about this again. And yet, so there's this weird balance of like extreme curiosity. They actually physically feel a little bit different when they're looking at like something like this, as opposed to when they're just looking at a picture of a tree or something. Yeah. And they don't feel that they can talk about this. And so, that's where the shame comes in, where, they go years and years and years starting to slide into this addiction. And, I've read that like, say like lust or pornography or like the sexual response cycle and an orgasm like that if you look at the brain, it's basically like heroin. Mm-hmm. The brain goes through the same sequence of events that the brain does under heroin. And so imagine giving heroin to an 8-year-old and basically saying, now, you're going to have to deal with this on your own. Like, this is going to be, like, you got to, we live in a world with, technology where, phones and internet, that stuff's not going away. And so it's always readily available. And so it's like, give them their first hit of heroin at 8, put it in their pocket, ask them to carry it around with them wherever they go for the rest of their life.
And then also tell them to not talk about it.
And don't ever talk about it, but don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. It's a bit of handing them a loaded gun and trusting that they'll know how to handle it responsibly. And I think, what you're saying about putting it in their pocket, I think back when I was a kid, and the closest, we didn't have a computer in our home till I was in college. Mm-hmm. The closest that you could get to access was a blurry channel that you weren't subscribed to, and every now and then the wave would settle down enough to where you'd be like, I think that's a boob.
Yeah.
Like, or, you could go down to a bookstore or like even I think Walden Books at that time sold like Playboy or something. Versus now, it's not even that every home has a computer, but every person has an iPhone that is equipped with full access to the internet and is completely portable and mobile. I've had clients before to where it was, on their way home from work, they would go drive and park behind a building, to watch pornography. And the dangers in such access, like, I read a study when I was in school that talked about how Google has rewired our ability to make memories and remember things because we have instant access to every answer. It's the dark side of what Einstein said about, well, why would I memorize such things when I have access to books all the time? So it affects our ability to form, long-term memories because we just pull out our phone and we give something to Google and there you go. And so I think pornography at such an easy access point is also rewiring our brain's ability to deal with stressors, and our brain's ability to cope because we have such easy access to a unhealthy coping mechanism.
Yeah, and this is where that attachment piece also kind of gets interwoven in all this. It's that we and I'm assuming a lot of people understand what the attachment theory is, but the general base of attachment theory is that we're wired for relationships, and so that we have these people in our lives, like our parents, early primary caregivers, later on spouses, but people that we really really want to have that closer connection with, and yet we also live in a world where we hurt each other a lot. Like relationships are difficult. I'm a parent of 2 boys that I'm guaranteed that they'll benefit someday by sitting on a couch with a therapist talking about some of the ways that I've harmed them, not because I want to harm them, because I'm just not a perfect parent. And so, but that's that need for connection. It's in us. It's in us from the very beginning of life. If we don't connect with the caregiver, from the moment of birth, like we would die. Like we can't feed ourselves, take care of ourselves. Like we need to have somebody say, hey, the relationship with you means enough to me that I'll be in pain or in sacrifice, to have this relationship with you. And so you see things like today when a baby's born, like they want, the mothers and the fathers to have skin to skin contact within the first moments of life. Wow. Because what that does is that releases something called oxytocin, which makes you feel safe. Mm-hmm. It regulates, the heartbeat, the breathing. It calms, this baby who's just gone through this traumatic experience of like, I'm in this nice, secure womb, and now I'm like, what is going on, And so attachment, starts to develop in those first moments of life. And but the problem is that as let's just say we wound each other and we get older, sometimes you wonder. Kids are very egocentric and they think everything's their fault, or it's all, the peekaboo game is pretty amazing because if it's not in front of their face, they don't think it exists anymore.
Object permanence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they attribute pretty much everything to them. Like, it's my fault, if somebody's upset with me. It's my fault if my mom and dad are mad at each other, and so to develop and to cope with this, like, relational stressors, we see that they oftentimes turn to one of 2 kind of main coping methods. It's either to kind of get withdrawn and avoided, or to get very anxious and clingy.
Pursue withdrawal.
And so, and all the while you're just seeking, again, this like safe, secure, like, just knowledge that like we're okay. That you love me, I love you, like that we like each other, we want to be around each other. Well, when you're seeking that and you come across this image, that all of a sudden starts this sexual response cycle inside of you. And so, for most, it's not like they just look at pornography just so like, oh, I just look at it for the picture. I mean, they look at it as a means to an end. It's they start to get aroused and they, masturbate and they have an orgasm. And that same process that releases oxytocin back when they were a baby, as their skin-to-skin contact happens during that orgasm, oxytocin is released. And so there's this almost this connection, or this attachment now to this image, which immediately goes away as soon as that's over. You shut the laptop, you turn the phone off. It's not like that person on the other end of that screen is like there to say, oh, you're sick today. Can I take care of you? Like, oh, you had a hard day at work. Like, how do you feel about what your boss said? I mean, you don't have a relationship. And so there's this like constant longing to go back. And so when you talked about like that, yeah, it's like that sometimes this technology is taking away our ability to kind of, maybe to get our needs met in the real world in healthy ways. I so much see that is that we turn to these surrogate attachments of, sexual images to kind of get that oxytocin high that we're all craving for in relationships. But now we don't really know how to do that so well in relationships, or like we're feeling so much shame because we've just also remembered that that's like the worst thing in the world that you can do if you grew up in, a Christian home, or your spouse gets really hurt by it, and so you can't tell them about it, and it creates this perfect storm of like where it's like we just get further and further into that.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that I have always it's always helped me um, have empathy towards people that are wrestling with that is the fact that if addiction's an intimacy disorder and the same chemical processes take place in your brain as any other addiction when it comes to porn, and I all of my clients that have struggled with sex addiction have been guys thus far. I've had some married couples where that's what's bringing them in.
Yeah.
It's always the symptom bearer is the guy. Their inability to form healthy emotional bonds is causing them to lean harder into the fantasy element of porn because they don't have to pay the price of vulnerability with the porn. Real intimacy, you have to pay the toll. You have to be vulnerable. You have to share your heart with another, and like all of your heart, as well as be able to receive and steward their heart as well. It requires you to give. Versus when it comes to porn, there is that fantasy element. It's an endless menu. It's like the Cheesecake Factory when it comes to menus. Like there's just a billion pages, and you can always find what it is that you're particularly wanting, and you don't have to pay anything. Like you were saying, you shut the laptop, and it's kind of an a la carte, pay-as-you-go thing. And so one of the things that I always try to help them understand is, as a coping strategy, it does work. It just works temporarily. And in the end, if we look at, and this is something that I think when I had Chris Murphy on, I even drew up and posted on the Twitter for the show, Carnes's cycle of shame. In the end, when you start out whatever the trigger feeling is, and you drop down into preoccupation, into ritual, into the acting out, and then you move on to despair, and you just get caught in that circle. So if false intimacy is coming from that circle, then the antidote to false intimacy would be true intimacy. And so I always try to help guys get started in, how do you develop true intimacy, and how do you practice it in a safe environment with people who are safe, so that it can spread into other areas of your lives.
Yeah, and my approach to kind of treating any kind of sexual addiction is not to try to, how do we keep you away from this? We're never going to keep ourselves away from it. Like it's the largest grossing industry in the world when you kind of combine, this revenue of the online, pornography industry. So, I mean, we can't stop letting Amazon take over every other aspect of our lives. Like, like, oh, Amazon does this now, I'll do this with them now too, and like, but Amazon's nothing compared to the pornography industry.
Yeah.
So it's not going away. So we can't, if the strategy is just to stay away from it, that's not going to work. The strategy has to be, okay, what's better out there? Like what's a better, like what replaces this?
What's true life?
Yeah. Because true intimacy with somebody else, like, actually fulfills beyond just a moment. Now, there's hard moments in true intimacies, like you said. I mean, they're hard conversations sometimes, but like there's a greater satisfaction that comes from that. That it's like, it's eating a bag of potato chips versus eating like something of real substance. It's like 10 minutes later you're hungry again, but if you go eat a steak, like you're like fulfilled, like you're satisfied for longer. And so the work is how do we create secure attachment in your life? What are the blockers? What has kept you from experiencing true intimacy with other people, whether it's a spouse or in friendships? And so if we got to go back and do some work in your past because you've got trauma, that has made your brain believe that other people are dangerous, then we go back and we do that work. If it's family of origin stuff, like where it's just, messages like that as men, like, guys don't cry, guys aren't emotional, then we got to go back and we got to learn how to
toxic masculinity.
We got to learn how to do that. And what I found with my clients is that, once they're able to receive what their heart truly desires, this stuff just becomes more of a nuisance. Like it's I always tell guys, don't ever expect for you to be, never tempted again. Like, don't ever expect to think that, this is not, you're going to get cured. You'll never struggle with this again.
There's no graduating from recovery, and then you are completely, free and different, and you'll never struggle again.
Yeah. Yeah. But do expect that when you are pursuing the things that you're wired to really crave and desire, that you will be fulfilled in that. And so that's like one of the things that I love so much about getting to do this work is that, you probably experienced it too. Some guys have struggled for 20, 30 years with this. And then they come in because for 20 or 30 years they've been so miserable, and they're just finally fed up. So I love getting to walk with them, into like a new, more freedom way of living. Or I love, it's even, I think that younger generations now are starting to catch on that this is a problem, and so I love it when I get that 21, 22-year-old that's in. It's basically like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Like, I don't want to struggle with this the rest of my life. And
you do see a lot of, I guess I'd call them movements coming up now, and I follow several of them on Twitter. One's called The New Drug. There's the No Fap thing, where it's like not necessarily people coming from a religious background or something, where they're trying to move away from porn because they have a religious conviction, but because the scientific studies that have been done show the harm that it can cause. And I think earlier and earlier people are catching on to the effects that it's having on their life, and really reflecting and saying, is this something that I want to carry with me into the future? And are concluding no. I remember, I love that you went to a place of, hey, let's get you in touch with your own heart. Because I remember pretty early on in my youth ministry career getting introduced to several books, Every Young Man's Battle being one, where it seemed like, and I read that 15 years ago, so I mean, I'm not going to remember it, but it seemed like it was more, hey, here are skills you can have to keep you away from it, rather than going deep into why are you looking at it, what are you trying to get away from, what are you trying to get to. I remember specifically it talking about the need to bounce your eyes. Like if you see an image, train yourself to bounce your eyes off of it and look at something different. And I thought, it that seems so surfacey. Like it just seems like it would be a better conversation, a better method to have in introducing why are you. Which, obviously, if we drive down the street and we see a billboard, and especially there's several in our town advertising breast enhancement or whatever. So there's some images that you're not, but why are you seeking out that image? Like, why are you, so it's absolutely fascinating. I super want to read your your dissertation and your uncle's now, to see what you guys found and how I can incorporate it into my work. And it is something that I hope that more and more of us can continue to do research on and add to the field in an effort to help people heal and help people move past it. Because I think for so long it was just something that went unaddressed, and we're seeing a lot of the consequences of that now. Well, that's absolutely incredible. Let's talk about a movie.
All right.
So, what movie did you bring today?
We bought a zoo.
We bought a zoo.
Matt Damon.
Yes. Leigh-Ann and I watched it last night.
Yeah.
I had seen it like several years ago before I moved up on HBO,
Mm-hmm.
and remember like crying in my room when I
Yeah.
watched it, but B just I mean really liking it, and I think it's always fascinating when a guest chooses a movie that I watched pre-training
Mm-hmm.
to go back and revisit it, and see what impressions I have after. What
Yeah.
was it about the movie that made you want to pick it?
I just think it's, well, I mean, it's a great movie to start with. Like the storyline, kind of based on a true story. I always kind of like those to begin with too.
I was disappointed when I Googled it last night to see the zoo was in England. Like I was
Yeah.
really hoping it was going to be here that I could
mean,
be like, all right, we're going.
Let's drive over to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I liked about it is, from a clinician standpoint, is that I just think it does a really good job of kind of showing a grieving process, and when we talk about like how to experience our emotions and how to value them, and you think about this emotion like sadness, which is inevitably a part of this world that we live in. Sadness is just when we all have losses that we have to deal with, and whether they're the loss of somebody that we love or the loss of something that matters to us, we have to deal with this. And so this movie, I don't know. I mean, I guess we can give away some of the premise of how do we do this?
I got some feedback a while ago that I needed to give spoiler warnings. It's kind of my thought that if you click on a podcast that's talking about a movie, like you ought to know there's spoilers, but just in case you didn't at this point,
so
like past this point, here be spoilers.
Yes.
So.
Okay. Spoiler word. Yeah. So in this movie, this actually happens in the very first like opening scene. Is that you see Matt Damon's character with his brother. They're walking to go get lunch or something, and his brother's like, "Hey, how about this restaurant here?" And he's just like, "I can't yet." And
one was closed temporarily, and he said, "Oh, it means that guy has a hangover today."
Yeah.
And then they walk up to the next one, and it's I can't go there yet.
Yeah, and so then you start to learn that like his wife has recently passed away, but that restaurant is where he met her, and he can't go in and deal with the feelings that get brought up for him when he goes in there or walks by there. And so you see this. The first half of the movie, you see this man struggle with really not knowing what to do with his sadness, not knowing how to process it. He's like a lot of us when we're overwhelmed by an emotion, and of course I can't even pretend to imagine what that kind of emotion would be like, to lose your spouse, and so he's doing probably what most of us would do. Is he's kind of fumbling his way through this, and he's trying to figure out how to make himself better, which part of how he tries to make himself better is to just get away from the life he's been in that was with her and to try to create his new life. So I'm just gonna run, and I'm gonna go buy a zoo. I'm gonna look for this house. And
I think there's a couple of interesting parts at the beginning. One is when he's dropping the kids off at school, and one of the moms at the school gives him some food and makes it really clear, hey, if you'd like, this meal for 3 can be a meal for 4. And even kind of like while holding on to, I guess it's like a casserole dish, kind of like pulls the dish back towards her, which pulls him, oh yeah, this could be a meal for 4. And then he spouts back, yeah, my brother's coming over tonight. That'd be great.
Yeah.
As well as there's a scene, and I thought, to me, this was brilliant. He goes into the restroom at his home, and as he's standing in front of the mirror, kind of looks right, and on the shelf, one shelf is all her jewelry, and then the top shelf is just medicine bottle after medicine bottle, kind of giving you a little bit of a clue where she was at, when she passed, that it wasn't just kind of a unexpected accident or something along those lines, that it was more a slow kind of medical thing.
Yeah.
And we're told that he's a what did they call him? Something junkie.
Like a thrill junkie or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, and he's, I guess, a journalist, and so he starts pitching these ideas to his boss, And his boss is like, yeah, you could write about that from home so that you could be at home. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I don't need your sympathy. And then he just says, I quit. And his boss
Mm-hmm.
goes, well, at least let me lay you off so I can give you severance. And he's like, that's sympathy. I quit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done. Also text me. I love you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think even right there, it's kind of telling me like he's not a person who in his sadness has fully withdrawn and disengaged from his heart,
Yeah.
because he's able to tell people, you know, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, I still care about you.
Mm-hmm.
But he is, which there is no right way to grieve and feel
Mm-hmm.
sadness, but he's definitely still discovering how he's going to do it.
Yeah, and I just see, like, what I see oftentimes, is that because sadness is such a hard emotion to feel. I mean, of all of our emotions, I would rank that as probably the most difficult emotion to feel. That's very subjective, right?
Why would you rank it as the most difficult?
I I mean, I guess one that when I think about my clients' experiences and those who have gone through great losses, I don't know that I've ever seen anybody in pain like I've seen when I see somebody dealing with sadness. And I know for myself, like that's probably my least favorite emotion to experience.
Oh, interesting.
So that's why I would rank it.
Yeah.
There.
Would you say that that's so one, I mean, quote unquote theory that I've been working with since I started kind of pointing my life towards entering into therapy as a career
Mm-hmm.
was that each of us has a theme emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be that it's our theme because we have the toughest time managing it or dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's our theme because we feel it the most.
Mm-hmm.
It maybe it's our theme because we run from it the most.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that sadness is yours, or?
I mean, that's a great question. I've never thought of it in that way. So I'd probably have to sit with that for a while. I wouldn't have said that initially. No.
Mm-hmm. Mine's loneliness.
Okay.
So like getting clued into like Enneagram stuff.
Yeah.
And discovering that I'm a 6 and like motivated by the fear of the loss of safety and security.
Yeah.
Like so much of the early stuff was I'm so afraid to be alone that I
Mm-hmm.
want to orient myself to where I never have to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of fit in with my theory of, hey, theme feelings, and
Yeah.
that's kind of mine.
Yeah. That's a good. I like that idea. I mean, I'll think on that some. I have been, unfortunate to not have to. I haven't had. I've had losses in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, personally, like I think of the loss of my great grandmother, who I was close with as I was a child.
Your great grandmother?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. She went on all of our family vacations with us. Like, we just, her and my dad had a really special connection. So, her loss was pretty big in my life. But, been, fortunate, outside of that to not have personally had it, real big losses in my life. I think about, when I think one of the other times though that like as a therapist as I started to confront this a little bit is when my wife's grandmother passed away, who I was also close with and my wife was very close with, so that was a big loss, to not only process on my own level but see her process. And so but kind of making this connection like that I where what resonated with me and sort of Matt Damon's character is that you see he's not okay. You kind of like whenever there's loss in our life and we know we're not okay, he just he doesn't really want to look at it. And so like I think that part of the, like just kind of quitting a job like because he can't just get away, he's just gonna quit his job and go do something else, and this challenge of like this zoo is like I'm gonna just throw myself into something, and I do that, like
Yeah.
I can throw myself into work or a project or whatever and cut off myself from feelings. I'm pretty good at that. He, but the relationship with his kids is, I mean, he can't be there for, especially his son. Like his son needs him to
Yeah.
be. because he's not really dealing with his stuff in that loss. There's this really interesting parallel in the movie between this tiger and what he's going through.
Yeah.
This tiger is sick, and the zookeeper keeps telling him, like, we need, put this tiger down. And he can't accept that loss. It's like, it's almost like, no, I can't lose two things now.
I think he says, we got to just give him a few, the character that Scarlett Johansson plays, I think her name's Katie. She's like, hey, it's time. I've been with him for 13 years. It's time. And he's like, no. And then she says something like, it'll only give him a few more weeks. And he's like, a few more weeks to live. That's what he, needs. And I think to pause for a sec, they get to the zoo because of what he believes is another need for them. Because I think as he's tucking his daughter in one night, which, by the way, the daughter in that movie, total cutie and just incredible performance. We've been talking a lot about Enneagram stuff at the house lately, and my wife says at some point, oh, she's a 2.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, she's able to kind of sense and pick up on the feelings of others. And I said, yeah, but she's not doing it at the expense of herself. She goes, yeah, she's a healthy 2. And she's making sandwiches and labeling them. And, she's just able to still kind of experience her joy and her sadness while also being attuned to others. But he goes to tuck her in one night, and she says, in this line, she says, the neighbor's happy is too loud. And the neighbors at their first place have this party happening. He looks out the window and one of them kind of waves at him, So when he meets with a real estate agent, he says, I just want new and I want rolling hills. And the guy was like, well, I think they're in San Diego or LA or something, but he's like, there's not really rolling hills in the city. And so he tells him about this one property, and it has all this room. And he's like, they get there and he's like, yeah, there's one aspect. It's a zoo. And he's like, what? But he decides, after seeing her playing with these peacocks and just seeing her giggle and experience all this joy, he's like, all right, we're doing it. We're signing on. So they get there, and as he's getting the tour, here's all the people that work here. Here's all of the animals. Here's the things that we need to kind of get to right away. He gets introduced to that tiger, whose name I'm forgetting right now. That's
me too.
Yeah, but 17 years old, and is pretty lethargic at this point. And they mention to him something about, you'll learn how to talk to the animals. And throughout the course of the movie, we see him kind of go back to the tigers. It's not an enclosure because it's behind the scenes, but kind of where he's at when he's not in his enclosure, and just sit in front of the cage and talk to him. And I kind of got the sense that it was therapeutic for him.
Yeah.
Like he was getting his stuff out to this tiger.
Yeah. And so there's like, he's starting the process, but then there's this one scene that to me is like this is the climax of this film of like, this is where everything starts to shift and change. Well, there's kind of 2 that are interwoven. There's a one point where he starts to take he musters up the courage to open up his laptop and to try to start to look at the pictures of his family, his wife. And then the feelings start to come up, and he just slams it closed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's kind of where he's at with his processing. It's like he knows he's teetering on it. Maybe he's kind of like trying to in a roundabout way, look at it with this tiger and trying to like, but I see that as like, he's just like, I don't want to go there yet. I'm not ready. I don't want to feel the depth of this sadness because I'm projecting into him, but like probably I'm afraid of what that will do. I'm afraid I won't be able to be there for my kids. I'm afraid it'll ruin me.
Maybe it's like, I'm afraid if I let myself feel, it'll be so great, I'll get lost in it.
Yeah.
And I won't be able to continue on.
Yeah. And of course that's such a common experience, and yet like it's almost like that's what keeps us lost in it, is that until we look at it, until we let ourselves feel, like, 'cause our feelings are for us, and like this is such a great loss, and he needs healing from this loss. And the thing that'll lock him into that is the refusal to go into it and to fully process and heal. And I've sat with clients who I mean, you know, one particular guy I'm thinking about who was like, you know, we were talking about the loss of his father 30 years ago, and I just was asking him, what was that like for you? And he's like, well, you know, I just had to accept that that's just how life goes sometimes, and you just got to move on. And so I was like, really? Like, after, you know, hearing how much he meant to you, I was like, do you ever go to a gravesite? Do you ever talk to him? And no, I just, you know, I've really moved on. And so I said, just humor me for, you know, this week. Go out there and talk to him. Just see what comes up. And came back in the next week and said he bawled like a baby for hours. And he was like, I don't know where that came from. And I was like, well, that's because you never let yourself feel that stuff. That's always been in you. And so in this movie, then there's this, you know, Matt Damon's character, he comes back to his laptop again, and he opens it up, and this time he's ready to face it. And so he starts to click through the pictures of his wife and their family together. And just, you know, this is where, like, tears are streaming down.
That's a very powerful scene, yeah.
It's hugely powerful. And I see that moment, you know, and Hollywood does great at, like, kind of speeding up a process, but I think they did their work, and, you know, their due diligence to kind of get him to this point where everything starts to shift for him. Like, he starts to accept this loss, and acceptance for him doesn't mean, like, instantly, hey, I'm okay, you know, like, this is all fine now. But acceptance led him to accepting that it was time to put the tiger down. Acceptance led to accepting some of the anger that his son was carrying, and being able to not just fight that, but to sit with him in it, and to move in a more intimate way with his son. You know, and eventually acceptance, you know, and leads him to taking his kids back to this restaurant that he wouldn't go to at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And he tells them the story about how he met their mother there.
Which, strangely, that was my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah.
Mainly because I love telling stories. It's one of my favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
So to see him tell it in such an expressive and experiential way.
Yeah.
And it felt like, A, he was engaging with the memory of his wife. He was engaging with the feeling of sadness. But B, he was inviting his kids into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it became this experience of sadness that highlighted the joy of the relationship.
Yeah.
And also, and I think this is something that we as people do a really terrible job at, invited them into how do you grieve.
Yeah.
Because I think what you were saying before, you know, sadness is something that we have such difficulty feeling. I think it's because it's something that nobody teaches us how to do it. And not that there's one way, but, you know, to certainly invite, you know, somebody into the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine, because of the expressiveness in which he did that, his son, and you see his son's artwork throughout the movie, you even see his artwork begin to change.
Yeah.
Including, you know, I think the first thing that he drew in that change, that tiger becoming the logo of the zoo.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that his son maybe is going to begin to experience his sadness or grief through his way of expressing himself.
Yeah. It's like, when we can accept our sadness, and that it's okay that I feel that I don't have to run from this feeling. I don't have to run from the moments, the memories, the things that remind me of my sadness. It changes in that whatever we're grieving, we don't have to, like, have cut off, you know, and removed from our life. Like, it's like you know, his wife and their mother will always be a part of their lives.
Yeah.
And
the part where he's tucking his daughter in, and she said something about missing mom or something. He said, well, your mom's always going to be here. What do you do? And he said, can you see her? And she's like, yeah, I can see her. What do you do? I catch her spirit, and I put it in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
That was like,
both
of us on the couch at that point were just leaking tears.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I love this movie. I will often ask clients who I think are, you know, on this cusp of, like, trying to process some kind of sadness, I'll say, I'd like you to watch this movie, you know, because I think that this is, one, I think there's a good illustration in the first half of this movie of like why I want you to do this work.
Yeah.
And what, this, like, accepting the sadness and process, and he said there's no right way to grieve. The only thing that I talk to my clients about is we just have to give ourselves the opportunity for it to come up.
Yeah.
I mean, we can run from it for 30 years. Or you can just put yourself in a moment where you don't run. Like, you're driving down and you hear the song, and all of a sudden, instead of turning the station, why don't you just leave it on and bawl?
Yeah. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing badly.
Yeah.
So just start.
Yeah.
And starting the process, you'll find your way.
And I mentioned, when my wife's grandmother passed, she was diagnosed with cancer, so it was a couple of years process where it's kind of deteriorating, getting worse and worse, and so we knew the end was near. And I sit every day like talking about how to process feelings with my clients, and yet I was so like cut off from my feelings of this. Like, I hadn't cried, I was just kind of like, I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
And I often will ask clients to write letters to people, not even letters that I necessarily even end up sending. I mean, sometimes I do, but just as a way to like let your emotions come up. And so one night I started with a head knowledge of like, I should probably do this. Like, I should stop being such a hypocrite and like, let myself feel these feelings. And
no self-shaming is better than
exactly.
A therapist self-shaming themselves.
So I start to write this letter, get my laptop out, and I start writing her. And, I said, "Dear Granny," we called her Granny. And I get about one sentence out, and I start bawling. And I'm in like the waterworks, like 45 minutes an hour in. Like, I'm just bawling. And I'm convinced that would still be locked inside of me today. And that wasn't the only time I cried because of it. That was when that's when it started.
Yeah.
And, and I think that would still be within me. I could carry that with me, 4 years later, had I not given myself, that experience or that opportunity for it to come. And so, We Bought a Zoo is, again, I go back to that scene where he just opens up the laptop, and I just think like, that's what we all need.
Yeah.
Is we just need to give ourselves the experience, let ourselves process and grieve, cry, do whatever we need to do, and kind of jump on that journey towards healing.
Yeah. I think what's interesting too is at the very beginning of the movie, when he and his brother are looking for a place to eat, his brother says to him, I think it was that he had told his brother about the mom who wanted to get invited over. And his brother says that he needs to be around other people. He needs to have relationships. He needs to have human contact, I think is what he called it. And then once they get to the zoo, through the course of that, he develops relationships with the staff. His son meets Scarlett Johansson's niece and, begins to develop a relationship with her. And then you see those relationships progress. And I think of a couple of times in that, like one, he goes to hang out with them. I don't know if it's like a bar they have at the zoo or like a break room or something along those lines. They're all in there drinking and laughing and shooting pool and throwing darts and singing and stuff like that. And he goes and hangs out with them. And then there's another where the surprise inspector comes, and then at the end they have this list of things they need to do, and it's going to be like $150,000 or something, and he walks off, and they turn and look at him, and he's over near another building, and he's kicking the dirt, and he kicks over a barrel, and this kind of stuff. And when he realizes that they're seeing him, he just says something along the line, like he doesn't get embarrassed or he doesn't try to hide that he just experienced this anger and fear. He just kind of, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
I'm going to be fine. That's going to be, okay. And I think that the relationships that he developed had such an effect and influence on his ability to go and look at those pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was allowing himself to kind of come out of the self-imposed prison that he had put himself in with others. And it gave him the courage in realizing that he could relate to others. It gave him the courage to relate to his own heart and relate to, or I should say, engage in the relationship with his wife again by engaging in her memory.
Yeah.
And Leigh-Ann and I, it reminds me of Leigh-Ann and I just finished watching season 3 of Queer Eye that came out on Netflix, which, have you seen?
I have not.
Oh my gosh. No. So talk about good, healthy cries. Just hit play. It's amazing. There's an episode in season 3 with a widower whose wife had died, I believe, same as the movie, 6 months earlier of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got 2 sons, and they are moving from the place that they lived in with his wife to a new house. And one of the things that it has in common with the movie is there's all these things of the wives that are spread through the house, and he won't touch them, including they have a dresser in their room where half of the dresser that was hers, he has left stuff in it, and he won't take it out, and he won't use it for himself because he's like, I can't, I don't want to, Well, one of the guys in the Fab Five is a design guy, so he remakes your space. And one of the things he did was in the new house, he has this, I don't know if he had it made or what, but this chest where it has drawers in the front, but also a top that opens up and you can store stuff in there. All of the things, including the mom had written birthday cards for both the boys all the way through their 18th birthday. All of the things that were reminiscent of her were stored in that chest. And then there was something she wrote on all the birthday cards, "Be nice to your brother." He had that engraved in her handwriting on the inside of the top of the chest. And and that wasn't something that obviously the dad knew was going to happen, but when he revealed that to him and said, I want you guys to have a place in your home that honors her.
Yeah.
So while you said your goal is moving forward, I don't want you to move forward in the sense of forgetting.
Yeah.
I want you to move forward in the best way you can, but I also want you to know, gosh, she meant so much to me and I love her so much, and I want your boys to have, this place that they can come and engage in the things of hers that are left. And it was just this moment of, I think, release for the dad.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to those pictures. And it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
To even have in her handwriting that on that chest that was engraved. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So in the end, they are able to get the zoo open through, cooperation and interdependence on each other. And there's a scene, well, I guess right before that, there's some tension with him and his son throughout the movie, starting with his son getting expelled from school because he stole something. Once they get to the zoo, his son is not a fan. I think he said, "Why'd you bring me out to the sticks?" That kind of thing. And then as he's on his journey of engaging with his heart, his son is on the same, and they have a confrontation at the top of the stairs where they're both shouting at each other. And I kind of thought, here's a cool example of, what some people might say, well, it's never good to shout. Like you shouldn't shout at your kid, or, the only way to communicate with your kids is, just through hushed tones and gentle, that kind of thing. But they just have this moment of true honesty and confrontation where he says, hey, we have a 7-year-old here that still believes in the Easter Bunny. Can't you help me out? And his son says, why can't you ask me how I'm doing? You don't care about me. Don't you think that I need help with this too? And I think they both realize, oh man, we are we are letting each other down.
Yeah.
Which I think is another level of the sadness. It's like a systemic. So there's obviously the journey of Matt Damon learning to grieve himself, but then they're also within their family system. There's the systemic thing of how do we grieve as a family, and in what ways are we running from each other in order to run from ourselves. I think that Scarlett Johansson at one point says, "Oh, does your daughter remind you more of your wife, and he reminds you more of you, and that's why you're having a tough time." And you kind of see this look on his face, like, ugh. That's probably a little too close to home.
Yeah.
But even just, and that was a relational turning point for them. Wherein after that, I think there's just this tiny scene of them walking at the zoo, and one of them kind of just like pushes on the other's shoulder in a playful way, and you hadn't seen that up until that point. They just gave themselves permission to finally feel and let it all out. And
there's actually even another scene between them that I'll use sometimes with my clients, is where him and his son are sitting there and they're mad at each other, and they're just like, okay, on the count of three, let's just say what we want to hear from each other.
Oh yeah.
And I can't remember exactly what they say, but it's kind of like they're both able to say what they need from each other.
Matt Damon says that he wants the kid to say, "You're a good dad," or something like that. And then I can't remember what the kid said, but it was this exercise in empathy and putting yourself in the other's shoes, but also in a weird way saying what their true need is.
Yeah, vulnerability.
Yeah, that was super powerful too.
Yeah.
Definitely intervention to steal.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I will use that too sometimes when we're in our cycle. Sometimes we'll just be like, okay, what do you want to hear from me? What do I want to hear from you? Like 1, 2, 3, go,
Yeah.
And it's good. So
yeah. Huh. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
It's such a good movie. And it's not even one, my experience doing this will be the 12th episode so far. There's definitely movies where I'm like, I don't know if I would want to watch that again.
Yeah.
And I get to talk to the person about it, and I walk away from the talk going, I love that movie.
Yeah.
Just because you get to connect, not just with the movie, but with the person you're talking to's heart and why they love it, and you just see their perspective. And I think with this particular one, walking away feeling the same, but even just after watching the movie, it is so, so good.
Yeah.
And
I'd
recommend
it wasn't a huge movie. Like it wasn't like, I don't remember when I first saw it, but like, I don't know, maybe it's a therapist in me that like was like, oh, this is so good, but yeah, I mean, it's a movie that not a lot of people have seen.
Do you mentioned like anybody that's in school for this or afterwards always wants to diagnose, that kind of thing. Do you watch movies differently now? Do you have to turn it off?
Yeah, I honestly, a lot of times I probably am just in entertainment mode when I'm watching, and I'm not like, thinking of that. Occasionally, like I watched like the documentary of Free Solo.
That's on my list. Yeah.
Oh, so good. But I'm like instantly trying to be like, what's this guy's diagnosis? Just because of like seeing him do something that like what seems crazy to me, so every once in a while I just can't help, but like I'm kind of getting perspective like that. But
yeah, there's been times there's definitely I'm able to still engage entertainment wise, but there's also times where I have to tell myself, all right, dude, turn it off. Just enjoy.
Yeah.
And then if you want to, once it's over, you can turn it back on.
Yeah.
And well, Noah, let's say that somebody listened to today's episode and they just feel like that they could connect with you and would love a chance to sit with you as a client. What's a way that somebody can get a hold of you?
Probably just through my website. It's the easiest. It's just my name, noahzapf.com. So NOAHZAPF.com.
Perfect.
It's got all my contact information on there.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, it's been fun.
It has been a blast. And we'll hopefully have you back on again.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Always good excuse to talk to a good friend and watch movies.
Oh, yeah. It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
All right. Here we are. No longer on Whole30.
I've had 2 Reese's eggs in a couple days, you guys. Not at once, not right when we stopped.
Yeah, we have celebrated the day at the end of, the day with a Reese's egg.
Yeah.
And we had the original and extra tasty crispy, which has Reese's Pieces inside of it.
Magical.
And they really were. A month of no sugar and then Reese's is like a reintroduction. It's like a rebirth into the candy world. And I'm for it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, same. Although I will say we really haven't, we've gone very slow with reintroduction and it's paying off. I don't think either of us so far. I've heard horror stories of people going straight to fast food restaurants.
It's true.
And then feeling terrible.
Your brother saying that he immediately, after a month of Whole30, goes to Dairy Queen.
Yep, he does.
And gets like the chicken tenders with gravy and fries and a Blizzard. And
probably not gravy, but yes, chicken tenders are right
Is
up
he not
his
a
alley.
gravy guy?
It's not that he's not a gravy guy. It's just that that's never... Yeah, he would prefer his chicken tenders plain, and then he would like to dip in the sauces.
Let me ask you this. Do you think, since we're still on the hunt, we could call the audience for this show Gravy Guys?
I don't think it applies to the actual show.
Okay.
But I like what you're doing, and I do think you should keep on that train of thought.
Okay, we're going back to the drawing board on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're taking the reintroduction into the regular food world slow.
And it's going
Sunday,
well.
we made breakfast burritos. We included a tortilla in that.
Mm-hmm.
That was great.
So good.
Tomorrow, we're adding in dairy with some cheese.
A little sprinkle of cheese on those burritos. I can't wait.
Which traditionally, Dairy and I have... We haven't been the best of friends. I'll say it. It's been combative. We've been pugilists inside
Ew.
the world of my stomach.
That's a gross word.
That it just means boxers.
Yeah,
like
I don't
people
like
who-
it.
Yeah. Do you not pugil?
No.
Oh.
Gross.
I don't know why that's gross.
Yeah, it is. It sounds gross.
Oh, okay.
We'll take a survey. I bet you every single one of these audience members thinks that it sounds gross too.
Nah, I think they got my back on this. So, we bought a zoo. Me and Noah talked about it. Noah and I.
You sure did.
What did you think? What did you think about the interview? What did you think about the movie? What did you think about the Reese's eggs?
Positive reviews for the Reese's eggs. This other stuff, though. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. No, I liked all of it. I mean, I always like all of it, but this movie really was so good. And I had never seen it before. And I don't think I ever really had a desire to see it. But I'm really glad that this forced me into watching it because it was just a sweet movie, like a sweet it was a sweet movie about a family's process, and I really like that. I think I told you shortly after we watched it, or maybe shortly after you recorded with Noah, that I thought that it there was elements of it that reminded me of Walter Schmitty.
The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. We've been watching the show Community, and there's an episode where these high school kids show up and they begin to make fun of the study group in Community by calling them Schmitty.
Well,
those wires must have gotten crossed.
I'm easily confused.
Yeah, the wires just got crossed. That's okay.
Yeah. Anyways, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and that like he experiences something bad. I mean, it's not the same thing as his wife dying, but his process in like coming into himself and in becoming, coming online to his own heart and feelings is through him sort of taking this adventure.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of that, just in the sense that like they took on this new adventure that seemed a little wild and fantastical, but it ended up helping them build connections with each other and also like
Well,
mending the
in Walter
connections in their
Mitty,
own
his
heart.
dad dies, and that's what takes his heart offline.
Right.
And then he finds out he's losing his job, and that's what incites the adventure.
Yeah, I remembered the
Yeah.
job loss, which I thought terrible. Not as bad as a death,
Yeah.
but terrible.
So We Bought a Zoo reminded you of Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Yeah, it did.
Nice. Did you have thoughts that you liked from the interview?
Oh, yes. Very cool to listen to. It's really funny to hear. I think you had a similar thing with Chris Murphy where as you guys talk, there's elements of what, like Noah sharing how he got into therapy, that he was a youth pastor. Like there's just elements of it that you guys have in common. And I remember when you talked to Chris Murphy, that kept happening too. And I just think that's fun to listen to. Like it's fun to hear you guys kind of discover that. Mm-hmm. And Noah had some really cool thoughts about the movie. The first one that I kind of liked. I mean, I liked all the thoughts. I don't mean to say I don't like any of the thoughts. You know what I mean? Is when he talked about how the movie portraying grief and how he thinks that Hollywood generally portrays grief. He was just saying that Hollywood can portray the grieving process like quickly, like that it happens quickly and that it doesn't. And he thought this movie did a great job of showing that it's not just a linear process. And showing the main characters like acceptance of it when it happened. In that slide, like the part where he's going through the pictures and like crying, and you guys just talked about what a cool picture of acceptance that was. Like him really finally letting himself feel.
Yeah, I think up until then he was really running from the feelings. Like he sat at the computer and got ready to look at them and then bailed. He shut the screen really quick. And I think even buying the zoo, it was leaving the home that they were in. It was him running from these memories. And so he had gotten to a point where he was finally ready to engage again. Mm-hmm. And it was looking through those pictures, very therapeutic, very cathartic experience for him. To re-engage those memories. And then, I mean, my favorite parts were them depicting the memories as him and the kids being like present with her. And especially when he told the story of how he met her, taking the kids to the diner and she was there and the kids going, "Hi, Mom." Mm-hmm. It was just a very powerful, very beautiful picture of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think before you guys talked about it, I don't know if I would have identified him as like running away from the grief, but I think you're right. I just think when I watched the movie, I thought, oh, he's doing all this for his kids. He's doing all this for his kids. And so I like that you guys picked out that like in doing that, he was also not really addressing the stuff that was going on inside of him.
And I think that is, I mean, even what you're saying now, that's an interesting point because I think that one way that we can run from our feelings is to focus on other people.
Ooh,
it's to tell ourselves I'm doing this for the kids. I'm doing this for my partner. I'm doing this for my girlfriend or boyfriend. And if I focus so much on them, then I don't have to feel.
That's a very 2 thing to do, an Enneagram type 2. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And then you pointed out something that I really liked. You were talking about the brother, what is Matt Damon's character's name? I keep calling him Matt Damon's character, but anyways, I
think
brother.
he might be another Tom Cruise, where no matter what movie he's in,
it's Matt Damon.
It's Matt Damon.
So Matt Damon's brother was telling him when Matt Damon was saying, "Oh, this like mom at the school tried to hand me this casserole, whatever." I guess the brother kind of responded as if Matt Damon should have taken the casserole, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink. from the mom. And he said, you need people. You need to be around people, which you really liked. And I liked that as well. And then, of course, he went to the zoo and he ended up being around people and meeting these people. I think the distinction that I thought of as you were talking about that was that he didn't need to be around people, quote unquote, like the other moms at the school. He didn't need to be like filling his time with meaningless interactions. What really helped and what he really, really needed was relationships with people.
Yeah.
And like, even though he had his brother, it seemed like there was a lot that he was kind of cut off from once his wife died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by that. I mean, not just be around people, like go sit in an airport and.
No, I know. I just thought that's even in the brother's perception of it. Like when he said you need to be around people, I don't think he was really understanding what.
Yeah.
I mean, he was getting there, but I think even that.
It was
there's a
very
distinction.
clear in the movie that the relationships that he developed with the staff helped him to come to terms with his grief and ultimately heal.
Yeah. And I think that's I just think that's such a cool and beautiful picture of how relationships can be healing.
Yeah.
And then I forgot to say too, more towards the beginning of the interview, like not when you guys were talking about the movie, and you were talking about addiction, and Noah talked about in his practice or like with his clients that he doesn't think it's good to focus on, avoiding the thing that you're addicted to. Like the intention isn't to focus on how do you stay away from this? It's to say, what are the things that you need instead? Like, what are the good things that you need that will kind of fill those gaps? And I really liked that. And I thought about how it could apply to other areas of our lives too, like other, quote, addictions that we might have.
Yeah. So that in the recovery world, that's called positive recovery and negative recovery. And anytime that anybody comes to anytime somebody comes to me and wants to be treated and helped with recovery towards addiction, we're going to start with negative recovery. So ultimately you have to start by taking the thing away. You have to start by working on, and I'm talking about for an hour at a time, for a day at a time. I'm not talking about this ultimate thing, but you've got to start by getting sober.
Right. Yeah.
And once that happens, be it for even just a week, then you can steer from negative recovery, which is taking things out, into positive recovery, which is putting things in. And I think that one thing that a lot of addicts, and I'm going to broaden that, a lot of people just don't realize is that life doesn't have to suck. And so you can literally ask yourself, what do I want in my life? And a lot of people don't realize that they have that chance, that they have that ability to ask, what do I want in my life? And to then empower, encourage someone to go after those things. Yeah. Which it's really, to go after positive recovery, it's really a way of helping them learn and engage in and discover their true self. Their passions, their desires, their longings. Yeah. And then instead of turning to these things that for so long they've used to mask their feelings and emotions and their thoughts, to instead turn to these things that help make them more them, that help make them discover more of who they really are and open up places in their heart that haven't been open in so long. That's what positive recovery is. And so ultimately that's what Noah's saying is you're not concentrating on the absence of something. You're concentrating on recognizing that there is a place that can be filled, and what do you want to fill it with? Yeah.
I think I also thought too, though, for like people who maybe aren't a full-blown addict, but like I did the thing recently where I deleted Instagram for a couple weeks, and there were times where I realized, okay, this is a time where I would go to my phone and scroll through Instagram. What else can I do? Even if it's like, I'm going to do the dishes instead because those need to get done, or, whatever it might be, or go for a walk outside because I like that. And that is something that gives me life. So I just think that reminded me that it's always good to examine things in your life that are filling your time that
Yeah.
you maybe could replace with something positive that's like life-giving.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that for both of us, we would say We Bought a Zoo. I'd say best movie ever.
Best movie ever.
Yeah. And I think that's all we got for this week. So I would say, at least for this week, well, I think maybe before I do that, I do want to take just a second to say, if you're still with us at this point in the episode, thank you so much for listening. And not just to the wrap up, but thank you so much for listening to the podcast. It means so much to me to think that something that we're putting out into the world is helping people. And I'm just so excited to be able to do it. It's so fun. And thank you so much. So I'll say with that, we're going to go ahead and lower the curtain, raise the lights, and say that for this week, theater's closed.